Hello and welcome to yet another video, and in this video it is something very exciting, well at least for me, because I'll be sharing with you guys my favorite film camera that I use and own. Now you all have, well not all, but some of you have seen me using this camera during my photo shoots, and of course I've shared my experience of using this camera, even my first time using this camera, with you guys on my channel. And despite being my favorite film camera that I use and own, it is definitely my most unreliable film camera that I use and own. And in this video, it's not a full in-depth review video, just as all the other my thought videos on different cameras. It's just pretty much a video based on my thoughts, based on how I shoot with this camera, based on how I use it, things like that, in case it actually might help some of you out. And also, if you have any suggestions that you can actually help me with, feel free to also suggest them down in the comment section below as well. I will do my best to read all of them. And having said that, without further ado, let's get into the video. So the Mamiya 645. Now, I'm not, a super expert on, which generations things are, which model things are. This is the 1000S series. It means that it goes up all the way to 1,000th of a second shutter speed, whereas the more common one actually goes up to 500th of a second shutter speed, which actually proves to also be much more reliable than the 1000S series. That is something I learned the hard way, but in the same time, because I shoot a lot of portraits, I would like the 1000 series more, simply because I can actually use brighter aperture, especially if I'm shooting in daylight condition. So yeah, that's why I went for the 1000S and not the 500S, sorry, not the 500 shutter speed version, even though those versions are much more reliable than the 1000S. But anyway, in this video, just as usual, just like in any other of my camera thought videos, I'll be dividing this video into 3 different sections. The first one is the ergonomics and the usability, followed by the image quality, which is pretty much also depends on the lens and the actual film roll you have in there. And then into my conclusion, why I recommend it, why I don't recommend it, why I actually really enjoy using it so much despite a lot of frustrations with it. But yeah, let's first start with the ergonomics and the operational side of things. This camera feels like a brick, and it feels very solid, it feels like a tank, and even though I don't recommend, putting it into like a suitcase and loading into the body of the aircraft, but in the same time, should you wish to do that, it will not have a dent on it, but I don't guarantee the actual mirror in there because it's actually quite huge, that it won't break or anything. But anyway, this camera is actually quite big, quite huge, and also it has a very kind of hefty weight to it, but in the same time, it has a very nice hefty weight to it that it actually allows you to balance your camera a bit more, especially when you're using a slower shutter speed. That being said, because of how big the mirror is, even when you use slow shutter speed, well, not even slow, just normal 30th of a second, you could feel that shutter going up and down, while the mirror going up and down, and then the shutter clucking, and then it can still contribute to that shakiness or vibration of the image and resulting in slightly blurry or shaky image as well. So just keep that in mind. But otherwise, I really love the ergonomics of this camera. Every time you just rewind the camera and then you just hit that shutter, the sound of it, the rewinding of it, and everything, it feels so nice and natural. And this camera, despite looking so simple, it actually offers other mode as well. So you can actually shoot multiple frames, in terms of like, if you want to do one of those multiple exposure, you can actually do that with this camera. So that's actually quite good. And of course, you can actually, if you want to change the feeling of not wanting to look through this viewfinder, you can actually kind of pull this tab and then, push this tab, and then like you push and then you rotate it, and then you can actually just take the skull out, and then you have this traditional kind of viewfinder that you can actually add a different head to it, or different skull to it, one of those skulls that you have to look down, or one of those head that you just have to look down like a more classic camera. But otherwise, yeah, This camera is a very nice camera, and to be honest, it was a replacement to my other medium format camera. It was like a twin lens camera, which I didn't really like that much because it was much slower to operate. And to be honest, as a DSLR shooter, I much prefer having this kind of viewfinder versus looking down kind of viewfinder. You can get used to that, but it's just so much more time consuming, especially if you're working with humans, and which I tend to work with humans. But yeah, otherwise, this camera does take battery, and the battery does go down here. Now, I did tape this up simply because mine is so worn out that the battery flap door keeps on opening, so I actually had to tape it up so that the battery stays inside. But otherwise, the battery doesn't always last that long because it's a very tiny battery. And if you're actually living in places like in Northern Europe where it actually gets cold in winter, like really cold, then the battery life really doesn't last that long, and you consistently have to like switch your battery or replace your battery every now and then. So yeah, just be careful of that. And the way to check if your battery is still alive or not is by pressing a red button up here. Once you press it, you see like there's a green light coming up on the other side. That's how you know that the battery life is still, you know, there, like the battery still has the juice. And for this camera, if you want to change lenses, it's also not too different from DSLRs. There's this little lever right here, albeit very small. You press it on the side, and then you just rotate to change, and it, you know, exposes that huge mirror. So yeah, there is that. And also, if you want to change film, you have to press this back part, and then you slide the lever like that, and then you just have to take this out. Now, yeah, your new roll of film usually goes up here, and then you kind of rewind it down here, and then you would wind it to where the film has the line start written on it, and then you put this back, and every time you put it back, make sure it actually clicks into place. Otherwise, it will not rewind properly, and you could actually cause extra problem to your winder, or to some rare cases, the shutter itself. Now, talking about the shutter, this is where the 1000S line of cameras or the series actually has a lot of problem with, is sometimes the shutter, once it clicks, it just doesn't come back down, and I would always have to press this button, the multi button. So yeah. Oh yeah, after you put in a new roll of film, which I haven't yet, but the camera thinks I have a new roll of film there, you always have to rewind it until number 1 reaches, and then, you know, you can press the shutter button. But yeah, for some reason, when I'm testing the camera, or if I'm just doing this kind of videos to you guys, or when I'm just testing the camera to other friends, sharing it to other friends, the shutter always works. But when I'm doing it professionally, which I had several times, took this camera to my professional shoot, the shutter just doesn't want to shoot, and that's where like it got me very frustrated. So if you guys have any tips on that, please recommend me some, because, you know, like I looked online and definitely oil was not one of them, and the actual problem where I would actually have to open up one of the side panels and go through like some of the mechanical parts in there. I tried that, it was not the problem. It's just, yeah, it's just not really reliable when it comes to operating with the actual shutter mirror on this camera. But yeah, for now it actually works, and the sound of it is actually very nice. And now into the next point, there is the actual shutter control right here. So you can actually control your shutter, of course, assuming you have your battery inside already, because otherwise the camera will just default back to its default shutter, which is, I believe it's 60th of a second, and it will always stay that way until you have a battery in, and then the camera can actually trigger the correct shutter speed that you actually input the camera to actually take pictures with. And moving into the lens, of course, you control your aperture through the lens itself. There is no auto aperture, so if you're into auto aperture, then yeah, tough luck. The lens I have mounted onto this camera right now is the 55mm, but the more common focal length that a lot of people go for is the 80mm f2.8. Usually this is the lens that actually lives in front of the camera the whole time, but lately I've been very experimental and wanting to try a bit, wider angle. And of course, roughly approximately the 55mm on this lens is roughly 35mm focal range, and on here, which is 80mm, it's roughly 50mm or 50-ish millimeter focal range. So yeah, there is that. This camera doesn't have any weather sealing though, so please be careful when you're photographing at places. And also, because it doesn't have weather sealing, just be careful that when you're shooting in moisture condition, be extra careful that the moisture doesn't get inside, otherwise fungus could actually grow inside. Likewise, if you're shooting in dust storms or like dusty condition or sandy conditions where sand could actually get in, and that could actually really damage the mechanical parts of this camera. So yeah, it's a very delicate camera despite how tough and heavy it looks, so just be really careful about that. But yeah, otherwise, the operational side of things is actually quite nice. You can actually control everything really nicely at your fingertips. It's another camera that, you feel part of the craftsmanship because you actually manually, mechanically control most of the settings and functions here. So yeah, but another downside to this camera though is the viewfinder here. I find that it is a little bit too dark. So when you're trying to actually focus within the viewfinder, it does take quite some time. And if you're working, let's say, with models, things like that, and of course models being human, so they also move ever so slightly, and sometimes you're just not sure if you're really tech sharp on their eye or just missed it by a little bit. And I did have several shots already missed simply because I moved a little bit, and also because it is darker than, let's say, viewfinders that you would find in more modern DSLRs, it makes it even harder to try and focus with this viewfinder. Can you get used to it? Yes, you can, and you will definitely improve the speed of manually focusing through this viewfinder over time. But if you're just starting for the first few weeks, you just have to learn to get used to the fact that this viewfinder is nowhere near as bright as, let's say, the viewfinder that you usually find on more modern DSLRs, or even DSLRs from like 5 or 10 years ago. But yeah, this camera was pretty much manufactured during the time, well, between 1976 to 1990. So yeah, it's old. It's much older than me. I was born in 1996, despite me looking like I was born in 1945, but I was born in 1946. But anyway, so it considers as the first generation of this 645 Mamiya model, because there were two generations. The first one was manufactured between 1975 to 1990, whereas the second generation was manufactured between 1985 to 1993. So yeah, and the second generation had a more kind of DSLR look to it, and a more modern kind of medium format look to it as well. But I still prefer the actual look of this camera, because I already have a digital medium format camera that I like, and it already looks like a rangefinder, so I don't need another analog medium format camera that tries to look modern. And this, to be honest, has a very nice look, and it already feels very nice to it. The shop wanted to give me the external grip for it, and I said no, because I already just like the look of this camera, and just, yeah, it feels very nice in hands already. So oops. So yeah, for me it was just fine. Oh yeah, by the way, on some of the 35mm film cameras, after you finish the roll, you have to rewind back so that the number gets reset. Whereas this one, the moment you take out the film and you put in the new film, the actual number on the side, the number of shots, gets reset anyway, and then you have to rewind all the way to number 1 again, and then take the shot. So yeah, just keep that in mind. Oh, and also once you finish the roll, you just have to roll it or rewind it 5 times, and then the roll should be pretty much empty and finished, or to the point where you feel like it's already pretty light, and then you just take the roll out and just send it to the developer. Whew, or develop it yourself, I don't know. It's up to you. And now onto the image quality. Well, the image quality I can't really say too much about because it really depends on the lens that you have and also the actual roll of films that you have in here. Now for this particular system, I really only have two lenses. As I mentioned, the 80mm and the 55mm. And as of the lenses, I can say that it has very nice, smooth and soft character to it. Of course, when you're looking to these cameras, you're not going to be looking at like the sharpest lens out there. Okay, you might be, but I personally don't look at the sharpest lenses out there, but just the overall character of the lenses. And the lenses produced by these well, the quality produced by these lenses are actually very nice, very smooth. There's very nice vintage character to it, which is of course something to be expected. But yeah, the rendition between the bokeh, the rendition between the edges of the subjects in focus to the background, it's all very nice and smooth. And yeah, I wouldn't really complain too much about it. Are there flaring? Yes, there are, but in the same time, it's very nice, and who cares too much about, you know, having good flaring control from these lenses, because first of all, they're very affordable. Second of all, you're buying these lenses to get into that vintage look anyway, so I really don't care if the flaring is too much. And also the fact that this also depends on the film roll that you take in here. Now, my favorite film roll that I just really like to put in here is, of course, if it's the color, it's the standard Kodak Gold 400. If it's black and white, I really like the Lomo Gray 100 film. Now, it's really hard to find that in Europe for some reason, but if you need a black and white film, it absolutely beats Ilford. I really just swear by the Lomo Gray 100 over the Delta film or the Ilford films, things like that, black and white. So yeah, there's that. But otherwise, yeah, it's not a digital camera, so I cannot really say a lot about the color reproduction, things like that. But if you're just purely looking at the available lenses, I would say that the lenses for this system is actually very nice. The color reproduction out of the lenses is also very nice as well. And yeah, just be wise and pick your film wisely on your own aesthetics, which film you would like to go for, which mood you would like to go for, things like that. But otherwise, yeah, that's it for the image quality. And now into the conclusion. So into the conclusion, I would highly recommend this camera, to be honest. Well, you can actually choose a more reliable version as well. So either go for the 500 or the 645J or the second generation that looks a little bit more like a DSLR. Because with the 1000S, there's a lot of unreliable part with the actual mirror. Of course, if you get the good copy, then good for you. But apparently mine is not the worst copy, because I've heard a lot of worse stories out there, but in the same time, it's not, you know, a great camera either, because considering I was really frustrated by several attempts to shoot this professionally already. That being said, it is a nice and fun camera to experiment with, and you know, you're getting that medium format anyway. The look and the feel of medium format out of this kind of film camera is very different than using a 35mm film camera. So yeah, just keep that in mind. And yeah, if you do get this camera, just be aware of all the limitations and all of the precautions that you have to take. You know, just be careful with using in certain environments, and also be careful with handling it as well, and also just be patient with it. And yeah, you'll come up with great results after that. But yeah, as I'm slowly repeating myself over and over again, this camera is a very nice camera to use, and it actually brings you a lot of joy and also frustrations to a certain extent. But you know, if you're patient with this camera definitely allows you to feel that craftsmanship of, you know, taking pictures, rewinding it, and also just, you know, feeling that mechanical shutter, just feeling everything just very mechanically, if that makes sense. Like for example, if you're just driving the motorcycle or a car even, you know, comparing the old timer to like the newer electric car, where everything just feels very, very smooth, very nice. It's also very nice in its own way, but you know, there's also some sort of that pleasure, that simple pleasure of enjoying something that's very raw, very mechanical about those old-timer things like that. And it's the same with this camera. Of course, there's a battery in here to control the shutter speed, but otherwise, again, I keep on accidentally unlocking the back part of the camera here. But anyway, there is that simple joy of, you know, mechanically rewinding and also just, you know, adjusting the aperture and adjusting the focus and pressing that very large mirror shutter inside. And yeah, it just gives you that simple joy. And also once you finish the roll, you can actually just develop it yourself. You just, you know, oversee all of these processes again. Of course, if you're in your, you know, middle age, then you might not really understand what I just said. But you know, I started photography with digital cameras, so for me this is something that's very mechanical, very raw, but it's also something that I really enjoy, you know, going through all of these processes anyway. So yeah, if you have any questions to ask or any stories to share, any experience to share, any recommendations, feel free to actually comment down in the comment section below. If you need a free photography guidebook, it's down in the description section below. The link is to my website. No need to submit your email address, nothing, just click and download. I will not bombard you with any newsletter nonsense. Otherwise, I thank you all very much for watching. I hope you all can actually gain something from this video, if not a lot, then a little. Yeah, otherwise I thank you all again very much for watching. Stay safe, have fun shooting. Till next time, bye for now.